Hello there. My name is Miko Dixon, and on behalf of Crafted for Action, I'd like to welcome you to the Being a Neighbor in the Neighborhood session on this Thursday, June 20th, 2024 at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please feel free to ask questions and engage with the panel by leaving a comment. Our presenters will be sure to leave enough time to answer your questions and address any comments at the end of the session. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Miko. Looks like we lost our third temporarily. Welcome, everyone. While it's called being a neighbor in the neighborhood, the unassumed word is being a good neighbor in the neighborhood, of course. And a plane is flying over as we speak. I'm Julie Wartell, and I'm the founder of PubQuest, a craft brewery mapping company. And I also teach at UC San Diego, where I teach a variety of classes, but one of them is called Craft Breweries and the Urban Economy. And through that class, I have done a lot of research over the years around breweries and neighborhoods and brewery development in neighborhoods and around those issues. And I'm going to turn it over to my co-panelists, and then we'll get started with some meat and potatoes, and then also, and tofu meat is just fine as well, of course. But we would love participation from the group. If you want to throw anything into the chat or anything like that, we are happy to answer any questions. So, David?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm the CEO of Border X Brewing. We have a craft brewery, actually two of them, in a predominantly Latino community, urban environment of downtown San Diego, or just south of downtown. Very dense, very small housing, so it offers kind of a unique perspective on this topic. And I'm also the director at UC San Diego of a small business incubator program.
Thanks, David. Roshni?
Hi, everybody. I'm Roshni Tapur. I use she, her pronouns. I am community and engagement and culture at the Atlanta Regional Commission, which is a metropolitan planning organization covering the 11 county region of Atlanta. I have a background as an artist and as an organizer. And so a lot of my work is around community development, engagement, and honestly, like how to be a good neighbor in the neighborhood, because development is always like changing our neighborhood landscapes. And so I think about this all the time as a human, and also through my work at the Atlanta Regional Commission, where we serve 11 counties of the metro area.
Sounds great. Thank you. And David mentioned San Diego. I'm also coming to you from San Diego today. But one of the things I love to do is travel around the country and world to visit breweries and talk to breweries about how breweries are affecting neighborhoods, how neighborhoods are affecting breweries, etc. So while don't worry, this won't be a lecture at you, I do have a few slides to just kick it off. So I am going to share my screen, and let's go here. So as we said, craft breweries being a neighbor or a good neighbor in the neighborhood. And what we were going to bring you today, as you just heard from our backgrounds, that I have some overall trends. Why are breweries good for neighborhoods and cities? What are the national trends around breweries and neighborhood development, community development, economic development? What are those big issues around DEI, sustainability, crime, etc.? David's going to offer his perspective about his experience building a brewery in Barrio Logan, one of the neighborhoods of San Diego. And then Roshni about why should planning commissions and similar governmental type organizations care about breweries and neighborhoods? And more specifically, what role does the Atlanta Regional Commission play around this community development and neighborhood development? Interestingly, this map I made, and this is kind of a substitute for what do we call neighborhoods and how are breweries affecting especially older revitalizing neighborhoods. I did a search in our database, our PubQuest database, and this map is from 5 years ago and just mapping all breweries that were on Main Street, because I made the assumption that Main Street is in a downtown area versus, and that might be a small town or a bigger city, but lots of other street names obviously out there. There were about 500 breweries at the time. I just checked again this morning. There are over 700 breweries with an address on Main Street. So just something to think about there. Wanted to start with a few examples of what breweries are doing when they are moving into neighborhoods. And there are lots more out there, but these are some of the ones that I like to highlight in some different ways. Third space brewing. So as part of the planning world, there's this idea of third spaces, that our home and our work are our first two spaces, but third spaces are community gathering points. So as you can see, there's a brewery that names themselves Third Space Brewing, and talking about being a part of that redevelopment in a historic downtown corridor. Jordan River Brewing, we aim to provide an authentic West Coast brewery, and this is West Coast of Canada. They're up in British Columbia, but that rural setting, serving, promoting, and enhancing the local community again. While we're on the Canadian breweries, Good Neighbor Brewing, that's why it's spelled slightly differently than we would spell neighbor. You know, we want all of our neighbors to feel comfortable. Please take a look at our house rules. Hops and Grain Brewery down in Texas. First sentence there, community involvement should be at the heart of any small business. So a lot of these are what we are going to talk about today. The last two examples I wanted before I got rid of those slides, Gold Spot Brewing in Denver. Our doors are open to everyone, and we go the extra mile to ensure that everyone who walks through our doors feels welcomed and valued. Really important when you're a part of a neighborhood to be that good neighbor, to obviously be very welcoming. And then the last example, Imagination Brewing, the country's first microbrewery and center for community transformation. So hosting thousands of events, giving back to the community, a lot of organizations that are supported. So these are great examples. And again, if you're out there in the audience and you would be a great example, please reach out, because I know there are hundreds of other breweries out there in terms of being great examples of specifically, we have lots of good neighbors as breweries, but these are highlighted as ones that are not only making the extra effort, but making it known to the world how welcoming, how community oriented that they are. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to David to talk about moving into Barrio Logan as a craft brewery, especially as a Latino-owned craft brewery.
Yeah, thank you so much for the context. So we originally started in a small industrial warehouse near the border with a very clear concept of when we grew up, we wanted to be a Latino craft brewery, and we didn't know quite what that meant. And we were invited to come to Barrio Logan, which is a predominantly Latino, historically Latino community for the last 100 years. And it had fallen on hard times. A lot of the buildings were boarded up. And when I told people we're going to invest there, people thought we were crazy. But I went there, and the community taught me a lot about who we were going to be and how we were growing our capabilities. So we came to Barrio Logan, and what we discovered was that it's a very dense kind of urban environment where most of the housing is 1-bedroom studio, maybe at the most 2-bedroom. And most of the housing was still Victorian. And as you well know, Victorians have very small rooms, whether it's a living room or a dining room or whatnot. So what people lacked was a common space. And I know the third place is considered that. And we really kind of found our niche there. And that, when we went from the industrial space to this very dense urban environment, we discovered that, people wanted a third place to not only come to after work or after school to socialize, to connect, but they also needed a space for a lot of other social events. Being a Latino neighborhood, a lot of the families tend to be much larger. And this, I mean, the extended family. So it's not just your own children and brothers and sisters, but it's the cousins, uncles, and etc. So what we started to grow into was we became that communal space for family celebrations, graduations, birthday parties, anniversaries, retirements. And, we have a beer garden and an inside, and we're always getting booked for those kinds of events. And so we've really embraced that. But, I think at the end of the day, that's really kind of what we're helping complement is the current inventory of housing that does not suffice for all the social needs that people have. So I'll leave it at that. But I would say one thing, the greatest compliment that we've ever gotten is people call us the Chicano Cheers. Because it's a place where everyone knows your name and you're always welcome. And so when this topic about being a good neighbor is obviously we've really enjoyed being that. And so there are a lot of other aspects of being a good neighbor too that I'm sure will come up as we kind of explore the topic a little bit more.
Thank you. Roshni.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that, David. Thank you, Julie, for that context of breweries across the nation and main streets and things. I'm learning a lot here. And I think the things that I think about when it comes to breweries, honestly, is around gentrification, right? And so just hearing the approach, David, of that, you're understanding what your role is in the community, that just makes my heart sing. And specifically also, I've been based in Atlanta, and we have a lot of development happening across our state, the city and the state. And I think the things that I've been understanding, because I am planning, of just how these processes come into play and who has power. There's a lot of development power just through developers. And there's a lot of priorities that aren't centering communities themselves. And so just thinking of the architecture that is in the neighborhood and just what value your brewery could add to the neighborhood, that just is really amazing. And how there's this cultural competency that I think a lot of cookie cutter businesses, and I mean, this is breweries and other places too, that don't respond to. And so even hearing the examples, Julie, of Imagination Brewing, and just what, if you're opening a business at all, and what is your place in the community, and in kind of any development kind of lens. I also am always thinking about neighborhood preservation, and it's not just historic buildings, but it's cultural preservation. And so the welcoming is great, and that actually also means not just a sign, but is it affordable for the people that are living there? What kind of people are coming? Is it the new gentry, or is it are you creating actual culturally relevant spaces for the people that are there too? So there's just a lot of, I think if you're a business, if you are a newcomer as just a resident or something to a new space, is just paying attention to your surroundings, to the history, to the people that are already there, and what your contribution is going to be. And I feel there is a lot of, and honestly, part of the work that I do is around using arts and culture for equitable planning. And so it's in the same lens of, if we want to think about revitalizing a neighborhood, let's put a brewery in there. or let's put a mural up, or doing these things. And that's not fair really to anybody. It's not fair to the artist. It's not fair to like the business owners. It's not fair to the community. And so just having some intention around like what specifically is that mural going to be, who is going to be involved, what specifically is this breweries or businesses like mission, and how are they going to operate in the ecosystem that's already there. Even though it might not look like there's an ecosystem there definitely is. There's always a history there. So I think that kind of intention and asking a lot of questions and just being really intentional about how you operate within the landscape is just really important.
I'm going to turn that back over to David, because Barrio Logan is definitely gentrifying, or has been gentrifying for a few years. And I've heard the story, but please tell everyone about how you're handling that.
Yeah, thank you. You were hitting on a lot of topics that are really near and dear to my heart. So when we came into Barrio Logan, we came in with intentionality. It wasn't just myself. There was a gentleman who made some of the best tacos in the city. There were other art gallery curators, but we were all Chicanos. So our vision that we had was, historically we haven't been allowed in every neighborhood in San Diego. It's not as much as segregation and as you saw in other parts of, the US, but there was still segregation nonetheless, economic, social, et cetera, et cetera. And Barrio Logan has always been a multi-ethnic community. So when we came in with the vision that we had to preserve that, even as we were moving forward into the future. And we came up with a concept that we call gentrification, not gentrification. And gentrification is more of a community and people-centered development idea that has very clear objectives. The number one objective you mentioned was, are we developing our space and our products for a new customer that's going to come into the neighborhood, or are we going to serve the community that's already there? And that was the number one thing. So everything from pricing to products to experiences, we're always about that. The second concept of gentrification is, are you erasing the history or are you preserving the history? And you mentioned that as well. We were very intentional. In fact, if you come to Border X, hopefully one day, you'll find one of our areas right in the middle. I found this fantastic artist, muralist. And I asked him, look, can you create like a history lesson just right here on the walls? And so, Cesar Chavez came to Barrio Logan. And so Cesar Chavez is on the wall. Chunky, who used to sing for Cesar Chavez, is on the wall. So basically, I could take you right now to that space and give you a history of the last 100 years, all executed in a really cool punk rock, graffiti, but clean style. It got to the point where some of the still existing activists who are like legends, OGs in our community, heard that they were on the mural, and they came in, and initially they were very angry, and they look up and they see how much love and respect we had given them, that they were just like, no, that's okay. I approve. And so that's a real important thing, because I think when you come in blank sheet and you don't reflect at all what's been there, you're erasing the history. You're genericizing, no matter how beautiful or comfortable or cool, you're genericizing that space, and you're losing so much in the process. The third thing is, we also wanted to reflect. We have this saying that we created a space and we asked the community to fill it. And so I invited artists, local artists, to paint the tables, to host art shows, to just everything. Was like, people knew the artist by name. Now, the one thing about Barrio Logan is it's an incredibly culturally rich district. In fact, we're one of 18 cultural districts designated by the state of California because of the amount of art and music and history that's in the community. So it's very easy for me to just open the doors and say, oh, you want to do a mural? You want to paint a table? You want to curate an art show? Come on in. And I literally, I want to take more credit for that, but my credit was just being open to it. And so we really filled, the third thing was we filled that space with what the community is, and that had a really interesting impact because it made the locals feel comfortable, like this was their place. And that was the compliment I always sought the most, because you have to understand Latinos, and this isn't overt racism, and we're not claiming that, but when we go to most breweries, we don't see ourselves. They don't play our music, they don't serve our food, they don't make beers that are more approachable to us. And we just, there's a reason why Latinos don't make a large part of the current brewery customer space. It just doesn't feel like we're the target demographic. And so we did the opposite. We made sure that everyone felt like they were the target demographic. The last post or kind of pillar of gentrification is, are you creating a positive experience beyond your four walls? And so we're very active on the block. We host events where we shut down the whole block. All of us do and work together. I come from a incubator business development background, so I host business training for the whole block. So we have in my opinion, one of the richest kind of block incubator programs out there. We have over 100 micro nano entrepreneurs who are artists or craftspeople or whatnot. And we give them business coaching. We do social media. So the whole idea is all of us together, rising together. And I think that that's something that breweries can do. Obviously, it's an additional load to making beer, managing your business. But I think it's what's made us successful is when you come to Barrio Logan, you're not coming just for Border X, you're coming for the whole block. And I think that's what's differentiated us and has allowed us to ride out the COVID trauma like we did, because we're still very much grounded in a unique experience that you can't find anywhere else in San Diego. So all the things you talked about, that's what we call gentrification, a people-centered development program that hopefully fights gentrification. But with the recent closure of one of our anchors, I'm afraid that I'm not sure if we're going to be able to withstand the great job that we did. We're kind of like victims of our own success. The landlords see what we've been able to do, and they believe that they should be compensated for their properties. And I'm not talking about 2 or 3% increases, but sometimes 50, or even more sometimes. And so that's why we've started to lose some of the businesses that were here with us from the very beginning.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. And Roshni just missed the last bit, but I'm going to tie it together. And David ended with the idea that like a victim of their own success. And one of the popular businesses across the street from Border X, landlords raising rent. And so that's where I was kind of going to go with. We've seen that a lot with craft breweries. And, and you're not the only one. A lot of breweries and others have been victims of the success of redevelopment going on in neighborhoods. And unfortunately, a lot of small craft breweries can't afford to, withstand that issue. Tying that to governmental organizations, whether it's city governments or planning commission type, there's a lot of, I've collected for years quotes and articles around governors, mayors, economic development people saying, we want breweries in our community because they've experienced the growth of breweries, whether it's in a particular neighborhood or outside of the neighborhood. Kevin Ham, who's now retired director of economic development for the city of Vista, a suburb of San Diego, they saw that success and not only just put a quote in the paper about how they wanted to attract more breweries, but really, again, with intention said, in this area where we want to redevelop downtown, we think that breweries can be the key. Went out there to attract breweries in particular areas. So governmental organizations, Vista being an example, San Diego actually did it as well. Instead of saying every bar brewery needs a conditional use permit, they said, if you're a craft brewery, you can go into these particular neighborhoods by right. So save money, save time, save a lot of hassle with that goal of allowing you to come in. In the city of Vista, there are 2 areas where that occurs. But if you want to go somewhere else, they'll welcome you. You just have to go through the traditional process. So, in that regard, we've seen certain governmental and planning organizations really promote and support, again, with intention of seeing the value of craft breweries, but those craft breweries that are parts of neighborhoods, not just, I want to just sell alcohol and this is a cheap area to live in. So, Rashni, how do you see that as either directly how Atlanta Regional Commission has played a role or could play a role in that regard?
Yeah, great question. And apologies for dropping off, and thank you, David, for. I haven't heard of gentrification, so I really love that philosophy. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think what we're like, just kind of advising local governments of just like what, how community development could be done, right? And so it can be even just kind of like, let's just take the gentrification philosophy and just start from there versus just like more traditional kind of thinking of for any kind of development. I just feel like that's the direction that we're trying to advise. And so that means like policy shifts have to happen, like local policy shifts, and like organizing has to happen. And I think a lot of the work that we're doing specifically is around culture shifts. So like, what kind of region do we really want to see? And so if we want to see something that is like healthy and livable and connected, how do we get there? And that actually means like what policies are actually beneficial to create these third spaces that are coming in, like Border X Brewing, that are culturally competent and serving the community and bringing in the folks that are already there, instead of the different other kinds of ways where it's just like a good land deal that you can have for a new business. So
yeah, that's great to hear. And we wish more commissions, planning organizations, and governmental bodies. David was a part of, I led a mobile workshop to the American Planning Association a couple of years ago. And not only went to Border X, but took a walk through the neighborhood and stopped and heard and learned about, cultural aspects. And a lot of the planners and others that were there really, just, talking indirectly, like got a lot out of that and seeing it really happen versus just reading an article or hearing it or, seeing it on a news flash type of thing. So I'm all about that experiential. And that's why I love going to places. I went to Atlantucky when I was in Atlanta and, and talking about their role as Black brewers and in a neighborhood. And it really varies. I was in Detroit several years back. Batch Brewing, great brewery in a neighborhood, in Detroit, love it or hate it. That's where I'm from, but has a lot of issues. And I was there to study crime, but I always go visit the brewery and, started talking to them about their neighborhood and whether they were part of a gentrifying neighborhood, and was told that it had always been kind of this very similar neighborhood. They were not in a, bunch of white guys that just wanted to brew beer in downtown Detroit. That neighborhood, they were keeping that, and it wasn't predominantly minority neighborhood, but they definitely had a mix. And that's one thing, as David mentioned at Border X, where it's not only just we welcome all races, genders, etc., but what are you doing to attract that? What are you doing to attract the local neighbors versus just attracting beer people or just attracting the typical craft beer drinkers? And my research on crime, of course, is very interesting as part of revitalization and transformation of neighborhoods, because a lot of these breweries have gone into very rundown, empty neighborhoods that have a lot of crime. I mean, there's years of experience and research that shows if you have an abandoned building, that's, what's it going to be used for? Not likely some good things. Brewery moves in, and it's funny because now there's a different crime, because now there are cars to steal or break into, but not the crimes that were happening before. So it's really understanding that balance of what is that neighborhood now? What can we help it be? But with all of those things that both of you mentioned, of being culturally competent in that neighborhood to really be good neighbors, and reaching out to the neighbors instead of just saying we're moving in and they see a sign that there's another bar, another brewery. So I think that communication with the neighbors, businesses, and residents is so important. Rashmi?
Yeah, and thank you for that. I'm so glad you brought that up, because one thing that I also think about is that tension for any kind of new business. You have the aspirations of like a business owner, and specifically of a brewery, it's like a specific culture, right? And there is that important public safety, right? And so it's maybe there's like a bunch of people here that have your own breweries, or maybe there are folks that like love to go to different breweries, but I think that conversation needs to happen of what is safety in our public spaces, in our neighborhoods, because what feels safe to a type of person might not feel safe for another type of person. And so just thinking about like, maybe there's like houseless folks, or there might be sex workers, or just like all of these different components of people that are in the neighborhood, and they're actually neighbors, and they're not something to sweep away. And so I think our country is definitely going through a reckoning of like, police and Atlanta specifically. And I do feel like there are opportunities to really think about like when you call the cops, and like how do you be a neighbor in terms of like thinking about safety and like who to take care of when there is some kind of injustice that happens.
No, that's a really good point. And I think when we talk about safety and crime, there is that point, like what and as you said, every person, whether you're female versus male or race, or, any different person is going to feel safe in different environments. The other really interesting thing, though, about crime and breweries or bars and neighborhoods, and this was a study we did in Portland about an increase in breweries. Does it relate to an increase in crime? What we looked at, though, the crimes that we talked about, where there are years of research that says bars and alcohol generate crime problems. But what those problems that the research shows are the assaults and noise and vandalism of drunken people leaving the bars, and those types of more quality of life disorder issues, which are adversely affecting neighborhoods by these bars. So what we've seen are a lot of neighborhoods that have bars or numerous bars. When a brewery tries to move in, they say, no more alcohol. Like, we already have too many problems. And so one of my interests in the research is to show that breweries are not generating crime like those types of bars, because they are a part of the neighborhood. And I have pictures of, whether it's signs that say, don't be noisy because we have neighbors, all the way to working with the police to help when they have drunk people that they need to, or signs about sexual assault increase from alcohol and other aspects of like not being those crime generators like many bars are, because they're there to just sell as much alcohol as they want and not be a truly part of the neighborhood. So, David?
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to add what I discovered because I opened up my third brewery in Los Angeles in the community there. It was a Latino community, and I was thinking this is going to be how I replicate my business model. But what I discovered there is not all and it's obvious now, not all communities are created equal. What I have in Barrio Logan is actually a rarity, I would think. One, because it's been the same community members in that community now for over 100 years. So what's happened is there's a super strong social network. Everyone's related to everyone. A lot of them still live in the family home. Some of the members are lawyers, nurses, and even gang members in some cases. And we have a strong history of self-policing. We have a park down the street called Chicano Park. And Chicano Park is a sacred ground. And, it is protected by the community and everyone is very active. And we've kind of benefited from that. I would say our neighborhood is one of the lowest in terms of crime, because everyone knows everybody, and it's not a place to really step out of line, I would say. So it's just very interesting. And then when I opened up in Los Angeles, it was very different. Most people didn't know each other. It was very fragmented, and there just wasn't that same social network that I kind of had the blessing of being part of in Barrio Logan. And so I think we have to look at every community differently and, think about some of these intangibles that actually make a tremendous difference.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, looking at the community, really working with your local governmental bodies about not just following their age-old rules, but, what does it take to collaborate on community development and transformation, because you're hoping to transform in terms of economic and community development, but you don't want to, transform it away from the people that have historically lived there, because that's what's happened throughout cities, small towns, and big cities around the country. Just wanted to touch on a couple other things, and you guys, I see we have 8 minutes left. So, other ways that I've seen how breweries are working with neighborhoods and cities are sustainability issues are big. What does it take to be sustainable? What does it take to be local? That a lot of breweries, upstate New York is probably the most famous for being able to kind of have all their ingredients local, in terms of, we do in San Diego, maybe one beer. There's not just enough local ingredients here to be able to do that for all the beers. Casa Agria, which is in Ventura, California, it's all agriculture all around there. And they're known for their fruit, beers. And so I think that's really thinking about locations is not just who's living in the neighborhood and what does that take, although that's the most important, but what else makes you fit in? Which organizations are you working with or collaborating with? Who are you inviting in as part of your entertainment or part of your events? That those are all critical to thinking about being that good neighbor. And being a good neighbor should equal then more growth and popularity and development for, breweries in general. David, any last thoughts on that or anything else?
Well, I would just add, yeah, you have to be cognizant of where you are and really take time to understand the idiosyncrasies of whatever community you belong to. I think the more you can localize your business, the better chance of success that you have. We hired locally, We reflected the local culture. When we do fundraisers for local nonprofits. I think there was one brewery that wasn't as tied to the neighborhood, but the smartest thing they did was host their opening and select a local nonprofit that was providing health services to the community as their main beneficiary. I was like, oh, they're smart. They're at least smart enough to realize that, even if they're not place smart of where they're coming or how they're showing up, they at least are acknowledging the local community. And so I think all breweries need to spend some time in really understanding where they are and not just pretend that we're just four walls and our customers are from everywhere. You're embedded in a community. Be part of it.
That's great. Roshni?
I love all of what you said, David, and I'm so used to Zoom. I'm looking for my reaction button to like make little hearts. Not used to this platform, but I really appreciate this conversation for sure, and like how to think about. I don't think I get into enough conversations through the commission in the how, and so it's just really wonderful to think about or to learn how and just looking at this comment too, just like how craft beer can be a source of safety in the community. And so like a brewery just doesn't have to be like the four walls or just like what you think it is. It can be so much more. And it sounds like there are breweries across this country that are so much more. And so it just feels really exciting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, there's another concept, adaptive reuse. And we see a lot of breweries doing that, moving into old firehouses, old schools, and really, again, preserving that, whether it's part of their beer names, as much historic things that they've found, to not just say it's four walls. I think that's a great comment. And we have 3 minutes. I don't know if there are any other anything that we wanted to touch on. We didn't really focus, although it came up a lot, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I think that's super important, again, to just say we're a part of this community, but we welcome everyone. So, whether it's new neighbors, whether it's something breweries are doing to attract new neighbors in the neighborhood, not just to attract beer drinkers, but I don't know how many people ever go down to Barrio Logan without, maybe Border X is the first experience going to Barrio Logan and then saying, wow, this is a really cool neighborhood. I could see myself spending more time or even living here. And so that would be kind of that ideal of, we want to attract, as a brewery, we want to attract people that see value in the bigger community and our neighbors, not just our beer.
I think I would just add to that the importance of not becoming a generic neighborhood. We embraced who we were. We built off of that foundation. And not only were we embraced by the locals, but over half of our customer base are people who are coming for a non-generic experience, right? We're on that list of to do, and when you're riding in the airplane, things to do in San Diego. Now we're on that list, and I think that's a real important lesson because being a business traveler myself, I've been all over the world, and sometimes I don't know where I am anymore because there's a Starbucks and there's this and that, and it's all generic now. It's all dominated by corporate representation, and I think it's important for wherever you are, whatever your history is, grab it because no one else has the same one.
That's a great way to end. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Roshni and David. This has been awesome. Hope to talk with you maybe in person and have a beer sometime. And I am also happy for anyone listening to provide. I have a ton of research related to a lot of these topics, and I'm always happy to share articles and other presentations, etc. So cheers to everyone. It's a little early in San Diego to go have a beer, but those of you on the East Coast, it's definitely happy hour.
It's after 12.
That is true.
Thank you, Julie, for everything too.
You're welcome. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.